Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third podcast spotlighting women in investment industry, but obviously all are welcome. My name's Gillian Hepburn and I'm from Schroders, and the purpose of the monthly podcast, as you'll probably know, is to help encourage young people, and in particular women, to consider financial services and the investment industry as an attractive career option. Why might they not? And how can we help as a result of the podcasts? Well, to date, we've explored some of the common myths that might surround this, and we've also started to explore some more specific themes, but also consider how do we demonstrate that we are seriously an inclusive industry? Last month, we had a great session. We looked at imposter phenomenon and we got some great feedback. So thank you, everybody, for that, because it's always really important to hear from our listeners as to what's landing well. The first two podcasts are already on the Diversity Project website and also actually on Spotify. I think that's quite cool, actually. Anyway, today I'm joined by two amazing guests to explore what we've called celebrating our differences. So who's in the virtual studio with me today? Well, first of all, I'm delighted to welcome Maggie Craig. Maggie's the head of the FCA's Scotland office and was previously head of insurance and pension policy and strategy and competition at the FCA. She's got a great CV. She's also an honorary professor at Heriot-Watt University, sits on the advisor panel for the University of Edinburgh's Financial Technology and Policy MSc, chairs the Financial Education Forum run by the Money and Pension Service here in Scotland, and also held a number of senior roles at the ABI and also at Aegon. But she's also a really good friend of mine and an ex-colleague from, I hate to say, 20 years ago when we both worked together at Standard Life. So welcome to Maggie. I'm also joined by Danny Hughes, who works here at Schroders in the early recruitment team. Now, being a mere 21, and I hate to say that, born when Maggie and I were working together, that's awful, but great. Danny is in the very early stages of her career and joined us 3 years ago, straight from school. She's now passionate about helping other young people join our industry. So let's get going, celebrating our differences. You know, as we know, diversity covers a wide range of areas. You just look at the number of work streams in the diversity project. But today, what we're going to look at is, you know, what do we mean by differences? And is it actually just another way for expressing diversity? Is it okay to be a bit different? And let's share some examples between us. Is there a perception that our industry only attracts a certain type of person? Interesting debate. And if so, what can we do to help encourage change? You know, do our differences come from our background, for example? I've often spoken about joining our industry as a temp. Yep, I stamped the mail and made the tea. I've only got an English degree, and I've also often had feedback on my regional accent. And also coming from the local comp school, that was another area where people strangely thought I was maybe a bit different. But there you go. I just thought it's always interesting then to think a bit about background. Maggie, can I start with you? What was your route into financial services, and to what extent do you think that brings differences to our industry?
My route was completely accidental, Jill. I went up to university originally to read maths, having come like you from a comprehensive and a fairly rough area in Glasgow. I went up to read maths and I hated it. I lasted a term before I left, and then I had to do something. I got a transfer to English, but I had to do something in the intervening 6 to 9 months, and I ended up working for an employee benefit consultancy. So then I went back to university. I intended to teach. I got to the end of my degree. I couldn't afford not to get a proper job. I couldn't afford a year at teacher training college. And the company I'd worked for temporarily were on the graduate milk round, and I ended up with them. So it was just almost entirely by accident. But I think it does bring something a bit different. My degree was English and drama, which is not a normal route into financial services. But I've got a bit of a mathematical brain, so I brought the analytical bit with me from my mathematical side. I brought the communications piece with me from my English degree, and it wasn't a normal route. I mean, most of the people I worked with, most of the graduate intake at the time were men, and most of them were in some sort of mathematical discipline. So it was quite different, probably more different than I realised at the time, to be honest.
You know, it's a really fair point, because you know, likewise, I've got an English degree. I definitely don't have a mathematical background. My brain just isn't wired that way. So for me to end up in financial services was a bit unusual as well, because I also thought I might have taught. And also I didn't really think about it at the time, but most of the other graduates were men, and they were actuaries, interestingly.
Yeah.
And I didn't really feel like I didn't fit in, but I guess it was a bit, at that point in time, a little bit unusual. But I guess what you and I brought to the industry at that point in time was certainly what I always called diversity of thought.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I think it's probably, it wasn't so much at the start, but gradually you realised you were different. You know, the actuaries got promoted sooner, and, you know, people had a tendency to promote people like them. So male actuaries promoted other male actuaries, that kind of
Yeah,
thing. You were most of the women, you were kind of expected to be in HR or comms or something. You weren't
marketing.
expected to be in product development or whatever. So it was gradual, and it was quite insidious. And also at the time, it felt as though that was the way it was. So you didn't necessarily question it, because that actually was normal. It just was what it was like.
That was the way it was. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I certainly think in the 30 years that I've been in the industry, things have massively changed in terms of how we feel and the perceptions. But maybe we should explore this with Danny. Danny, you joined straight from school now, and maybe people on the podcast think that's a little bit different or unusual. And how did that feel for you? And did you have any sort of concerns at the time? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess joining from school is less common than coming from uni or anything like that. But to be honest, I'd never really loved school. I was always reasonably average as a student. I never really did any extracurricular bits or anything like that. And so I didn't think university was really for me. So I just started applying for, the odd jobs, not really knowing or expecting to get much. So when I got called in from Schroders for an assessment centre, obviously I was quite shocked. Coming into the role, I was really nervous about working in a corporate environment. I'd never been anywhere of that kind of environment before, didn't really know what to expect. Also never been great at maths or really knew much about economics or anything like that. So I did feel like I was really going in kind of blind as such. But as soon as I joined, quickly learned that it's not the be all and end all of what you already know. It's about, being willing to kind of learn a little bit more and kind of open to new experiences and stuff. But yeah, no, it was definitely scary initially.
That's a really good point that you make. It's almost like let's get in over the door, right? And then we learn and develop and grow and understand the industry. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm keen to explore. You mentioned the word average, right? What did you mean by that when you said you felt a bit average? Because that's an interesting way to describe it.
Yeah, so I guess what I mean by that is school's not really ever come naturally to me, let's say. So education, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't something that I wasn't really naturally smart. I've always had to work really hard to get the grades that I did, and even then I wasn't necessarily a really high achiever. I never really got involved in extracurricular bits, mainly because I never really knew what I wanted to do in my career. I was always a bit, unsure on the different routes out there and things like that. So I guess, yeah, I just kind of always put myself down as someone who's a little bit average, who hadn't really done much, had part-time jobs and things, but never done any work experience or anything else like some other people at my school had done. So yeah, I always just thought of myself as kind of average.
And has being in financial services changed that for you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I still would say that, I think coming straight from school into financial services, or maybe any firm really, is still quite a new thing, but it's definitely growing, becoming more popular. University is great, but I don't think it's for everyone, and I don't think it would have done me any more benefit than what working at Schroders has done anyway. And so yeah, I think at the end of the day, work doesn't kind of directly line up with how you did at school. Obviously it always helps to have that kind of experience and things, but I don't think it lines up directly, and so it's one of those things where actually I wasn't as disadvantaged as what I thought I was when I was joining.
Great. So I think we're already busting some myths about whether you need maths and economics and finance degrees, and whether you can come in straight from school or from university. So it's a great start to this. Maggie, you've always shared a great example of feeling different, and this was, I guess, in part, if I'm really honest, was the inspiration for me to want to do this podcast. Would you like to share this with us? Because I just think it's a great example.
Yeah, I know you've commented on it a couple of times. Okay, so here goes. What happened was I left a nice, comfortable job in Standard Life that I knew I could do and I was very comfortable with. I'd been there for years. I had lots of friends. I knew exactly what I was doing. And I took a job that meant I was going to be working in London 3 or 4 days a week. I was going to have to live away from home 3 or 4 days a week. And it was a completely different discipline. I hadn't expected to get the job, so I'd kind of fallen into it, which is a bit of a hallmark of my career, I think. Anyway, I joined and within, I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks, I was utterly miserable. I come off the plane one night in tears. I said to my husband, that's it, I'm fed up, I'm phoning Standard Life, I want my old job back, I can't do this. I was working with a group of directors who were mostly men. They had all been to Oxford or Cambridge. They talked in accents that I didn't have. They talked about people, they tossed around names who turned out to be cabinet secretaries and members of parliament that I'd never heard of, that they'd roomed with at Cambridge. My accent was awful. I just felt dreadful. I tried to change. I bought some smart lady lawyer suits. I did my nails and my hair differently, and none of it worked. So anyway, my husband was very supportive and he said, we need the money, get back on the plane. So I got back on the plane on Monday morning and I went to my boss and I said, I can't do this. This is horrible. This is miserable. I hate it. And he said, but I hired you because you're different. And I thought, well, you could have told me that at the time. So we had a long conversation about how he wanted me to be the grit in the oyster. And I said, well, I can do that, but that's actually a very lonely place to put someone. I'm going to need some support. And on the one hand, I was annoyed with him that we hadn't had that conversation up front. And on the other hand, I felt, well, he was being quite supportive. So I kind of had a stern word with myself. And the next time we had an away day, I went in with my Glasgow University sweatshirt on and I never looked back.
I just absolutely love that example, Maggie, and I'm always really grateful for you sharing it because there's just lots of things in there, isn't there?
Yeah.
I also have to say I love the idea of the lady lawyer suits and the nails because I just think sometimes, and I don't know, Danny, if you think this, that certainly people do have a perception of, if we all work in the city, we've all got to be really smart. And I have to say, certainly one of the things that lockdown has done for us, as somebody quoted to me the other day, we're all living a life of lycra. And I do think, isn't it, it's not about the external image, it's about what we bring to the party. And I also think, I guess what was really brave was you standing up and having that conversation, but also having a supportive male that you could have that conversation with that was really honest. Yeah. And told you why he'd hired you, Maggie. Yeah.
Yeah, I still think it would have been better if he told me at the start.
Yeah.
Although to be fair, I don't think he realised. I mean, and none of my colleagues were setting out to be unkind. They weren't deliberately excluding me. That again was just something that I kind of fell into. That just was that environment. I suppose the learn for them could have been to be more aware of the environment they were creating. And I think we are more aware now of those sorts of environments and those sorts of differences and how that impacts people. I mean, I felt dreadful. I was miserable, utterly miserable.
Yeah, and as we know, we all spend a lot of our time at work. And there's nothing worse than being miserable, particularly if, like you and I, we spend a lot of time away from family. And that can make it even harder, can't it? Being miserable is bad enough. Being miserable on your own is frankly quite awful. So I just think it's a great story, though, back to, Danny, when you deal with young people in your role in terms of, recruitment, do you think that there's a perception that as an industry, we only hire certain types?
Yes, so I don't think it's really come from anywhere specific necessarily. I think sometimes, I come from outside of London, and I think a lot of people my age, younger, leaving school, think that London's somewhere for, the high achievers, the best kind of thing, and it's sometimes unreachable, which obviously isn't the case. But I also think, again, the finance and math side of things, people think you need to love that. When there are just so many obviously roles available in financial services without having to be really good at maths or economics or anything like that. And I think the corporate side of things can really scare people too. So, going into an environment that people are used to because they work in it every day, but is so different to school and even university, just such a different kind of flip that, you know, people are kind of a bit apprehensive to go into it and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use the word corporate, and maybe that often has certain connotations about it, and maybe about people certainly being unapproachable, perhaps. You know, but I think it's about being able to, I think once you're in, then it's different. So how do we make sure that we get that message out, if that makes sense, to for me, recruit and attract the right kind of talent to our industry? Because for me, diversity is all about making sure we've got the right talent, and particularly diversity of thought. You know, Maggie, one of the things again that I always find interesting is this whole benefit of a diverse industry and kind of reflecting our customers. Is that something I think that you think is really important for us?
Yeah, I think it is very important. A lot of it is about how people think and how your customer thinks. And if you don't know how your customer thinks, then it's going to be very difficult for you to devise a product or a service that meets their needs. So to take an example, I remember years ago, actually, probably around about the time you and I were working together, we had a leaflet that was going out that said to customers that, you know, if they left their pension early, they would get back the value of their fund, which seemed fine. And the way it worked at that time, there were a lot of early charges. So actually it meant that if you left early, you sometimes got back nothing. There was no value in your fund because the charges had eaten it all up. Now, obviously that's long gone now. But the point of this story is that I went to talk to one of the actuaries who drafted the leaflet, and I said, look, we can't send this out because it says you're going to get back the value of your fund. And people are getting back zero. We can't say that to them. And he looked at me and he said, but the value is zero. Now, to a mathematical mind, that's perfectly all right, because zero is a number and zero was the value. But
Exactly.
to a normal, real human being, if you tell them they're going to get the value of their fund, they expect to get something, not zero.
Not zero.
Now, it wasn't that he was right and I was wrong, or obviously I was right and he was wrong, but that wasn't the point. The point was his mathematical mind just didn't see anything wrong with that. Whereas talking to a normal person, we had consumers complaining all the time about these letters. It's that kind of thing. And that's a very small example, but that kind of mindset, you need somebody who's willing to say, no, I'm sorry, this is silly. This won't work. You can't do this. And that's where diversity thought comes in for me. Minor example, but quite powerful, I think.
Oh, a very powerful, and the simplest examples are always the best, aren't they? And it kind of just shows a bit of what right brain, left brain thinking on that one. Yeah, and you know, the example I always used to use, and probably still do, when I'm reading material, is would my mum understand this?
Yeah.
And I know I'm not saying she's a stupid person, but if my mum wouldn't understand it, then it's kind of not fit for purpose. So I think you're absolutely right. And it's back to, as well, is making sure that we do have that diversity of thought, but also encouraging people to understand that there is a huge variety of roles within our industry that people like Maggie and I with English degrees can do really well. Danny, do you see that in terms of young people coming into the industry understanding that there's a significant variety of opportunities for them?
Yes, I mean, I guess some people kind of know people that have worked in financial services, maybe in a HR or marketing role or something like that, and so they do know that there are other roles. But the majority of people presume that, especially graduate roles or like graduate programs that we have or apprenticeships, they just think that they're all maybe investment, because you know that is the main thing as we do as a business. And so I think that they presume that that's what they're going into, when actually, obviously, there are so many roles available. But I think that is sometimes what makes people a little bit more scared of going for a business like us or for an industry like us, because people think that they need to have all the information already and know everything that they're going into, but it's really not the case. And so I think, you know, the more that we can do to kind of raise awareness that we have so many roles to so many different kinds of people as well, the better.
Yeah, and also back to your earlier point about once you're in, it's about making sure that you get the right development and training and coaching and support. You know, if I certainly look back my career, and I'm sure Maggie you'll be the same, I've worked in a significant number of different roles across the industry, some of which I never thought, if I look back at my younger self, I'd ever be doing. And I don't know if that's the same for you in terms of the direction your career can take and the opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've worked in marketing, I've worked in product development, I've worked in policy, I've worked in communications, I've worked in public affairs, I've been part seconded to government. When I sort of took that job when I was 21 or 22, because I needed a job in pensions, and it was a job in pensions administration, I had no idea where it would lead, but I would never have thought that I would have worked in something which let me work with, senior people in the Treasury and DWP. It's amazing the opportunities this industry can offer.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I mean, like you, I fell into the industry by accident rather than by design as well, which sadly most people often do. I came in on the graduate program because I decided I wasn't going to be a teacher after all and didn't really know where I was going to end up. But if I look back, 30 years, I certainly didn't think I would end up doing what I'm doing now. But the path along the way, actually, and one of the things I'm always keen to get across, the path's been quite good fun, right? Hasn't it? I mean, as for me, it's had some ups and downs and roundabouts, but actually in terms of what I've been able to do and also the opportunity to put my hand up and offer to do things, I think is something that I'm always keen to get across to people. Give it a chance, because you just never know. And I guess, Maggie, you've probably felt like that at times as well. Might as well give this a go, apart from the fact that we need a job. But let's just give it a shot, yeah?
Yeah, totally. I think the other thing for me is that, and without sounding too much as though I'm on the moral high ground, this stuff matters. You're dealing with people's lives, you're dealing with pensions, you're dealing with their houses, you're dealing with their life savings. This is not some trivial piece. So, and for me, particularly now where I work at the FCA, that kind of public service ethos is very, very important. And I think that's something that the financial services industry, it's not always been perfect. We only have to look back to the crisis for that. But I think the industry has learned a lot and come a long way, because, as I say, this stuff matters. It's really, really important.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. I mean, to be honest, it probably took me a few years to get my head around that. And it wasn't probably till I sat doing a little stint in claims department, listening to phone calls coming in from people, particularly bereaved people, where suddenly we were able to say, look, because you have taken protection on your mortgage, you don't need to worry about some of that stuff, and taking pain away from people, and also reassuring them that somebody was there to help them out. And I think it's a really good point. And I talk all the time about how we have a privilege to manage people's hard-earned cash, and that's really, really important. So what we do as an industry, I think sometimes we can get hung up on all the jargon and stuff, but actually we fulfill a really important purpose. And I'm not sure maybe if we get that across. I don't know, Danny, when we're thinking about recruiting and bringing in the right people, is that something you think that we take account of enough, or that people understand?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think some people do, dependent on their background, whether they know people that are in the industry or have dealt with a business like ours before. But I think a lot of the time that kind of thing is overlooked. I think people, when they're looking for jobs, if they don't really know what they want to do, or if they've not had the chance to have that much experience, all they see is the role that they're doing. And a lot of the time coming in, it might be more of an admin job or something like that. And so they don't always see that process from end to end. And so the experience, the opportunity to talk to someone at an event or an insight day or something like that, to hear about what they do with clients and things like that, really does make a big difference, I think.
Yeah, I just think it's such an important point, isn't it, in terms of the value that we can all bring. And I guess it's back to, again, diversity in terms of the customers that we look after, and making sure that we reflect that all the time. And that's why, certainly for me, I'm always keen to bring more young people, but also women into our industry, because I think, it's about balance, isn't it? I think if our customers are 51% female, then let's make sure that that we reflect that, and that we encourage people to come into the industry and to stay in the industry. Now, I'm really conscious, this half hour always goes far too quickly for me. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I'm just keen just to explore as we finish. Danny, if you look back to your younger self, which isn't that long ago actually, what would be your advice to the people that are listening today?
I guess in a nutshell, just go for it. So I think there was a lot of roles that I might have seen, you know, when I was applying for jobs, I just thought, oh, I won't get that one. You know, there's no point in me going for it. I'll just leave it. When actually, you know, if I hadn't applied for the job, obviously I wouldn't be here now doing this. And so I think you've just got to go for it. You know, push yourself out your comfort zone, and just take the opportunities when they come to you. You know, the worst that's going to happen is maybe someone will say no or something along those lines. But yeah, I think just make the most out of all the opportunities that you get.
Okay, so maybe I could summarize that as be brave. Yeah, be brave and be bold and go for it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
excellent.
exactly. Yeah.
Maggie, what about yourself?
I think there's a lot in that. I think the other thing I would say is, you know, work with your colleagues. Work with your colleagues. You know, mostly I have found that most of the people I've worked with throughout my working life have actually been incredibly supportive. So I think work with your colleagues, learn from your colleagues, help them. You never know when you might need their help. And I think the other thing is, and I know, you know, we all have to put food on the table and pay the mortgage and all the rest of it. But my other point is, if you're in a job that is absolutely not you, don't. Life is too short to do jobs you hate. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that was certainly borne out by you being brave enough to stick your hand up and say that at that point. So I think there's some amazing points there. I mean, I certainly all through my career have tried to make the most of having some amazing colleagues. And I think, although this is about spotlight on women, I always say that there are some amazingly supportive men out there, and without them in my career, I certainly wouldn't be where I am today. You know, that's how I got recruited in the first place. And we've had other podcasts that have looked at that. And I just think it's really important to make the most of the people that you have around you and learn from them and ask for support if you need it. And sometimes that can be really difficult, but clearly, you know, as you found that the rewards are significant, and in terms of having what could be difficult conversations. Yeah. And lastly, but not least, to be happy. You know, one of the things we've explored in this podcast is the absolute variety of roles within this industry. And I've certainly moved around a number of different roles, and I guess some have been happier than others. But what the industry gives us is a real opportunity to move about and to find the thing that, you know, really works for us. So hopefully we're leaving everybody today with some great messages about the opportunities within financial services, some of the myths that we can bust, and coming in from different paths is always really important in terms of, you know, access to our industry. You don't always have to be a graduate, and Danny's certainly proven that. And I think what Maggie and I have also proven is that once you're in, you might find that you stay a long time, and it might have a few bumps along the way, right? But actually, you know, speak up, use the opportunities, use your colleagues, and enjoy it. And I think that would be our closing message today on this podcast. So all that's left is for me to say thank you so much to the guests today. Our next podcast is on Friday the 30th of April, and we're going to be exploring the difference between EQ and IQ, a different interesting one. So are women more emotional, and do you get IQ and have to suffer the EQ as well? So I think this is going to be a really interesting one. Maybe suffer is not the right word there actually, but do you get intelligence without the emotion? And how can we actually manage emotion in what is a positive way? So it's just left to me to thank our guests. I'm absolutely delighted that you were able to join me today. I do appreciate it's Friday, so appreciate very much your time. And I hope that everybody has a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you and hearing you in the next podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gillian. Thanks, Annie. Bye.
Bye.